Samuel chapter number 17, and we're going to begin reading this evening's service at verse number 4. 1 Samuel chapter number 17. Y'all glad to be here this evening? All right, what a blessing. What a blessing it is to be in the house of the Lord. Brother Bill, I'm so glad you're back in town safe. Did you get in town yesterday or today or last night? Well, I'm glad you're back safely with all that snow that's out there. So praise the Lord. I'm sure you did. I'm sure you did. But glad you're here safe and sound. All right, 1 Samuel chapter number 17. Look down, if you would please, at verse number 4. 1 Samuel 17 and verse number 4. The Bible says this, and there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. And he had an helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. And he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. And one bearing a shield went before him. And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel, and said unto them, Why are ye come out to set your battle in array? Am not I a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. If he be able to fight with me and to kill me, then will we be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall ye be our servants and serve us. And the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man, that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard those words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. I want to speak to you this evening on this topic, lessons from the story of David and Goliath. Lessons from the story of David and Goliath. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for allowing us to be here tonight. Lord, please give me your power. I need your help, Lord. Please give me the mind of Christ. Help me to be focused and help me to say exactly what you once said. And I pray for every person here and those watching online, give us all ears to hear, a heart to receive, and a mind to comprehend. And Father, please do a work in our midst that only you can do, and we'll give you all the glory now in Jesus' name. Amen. All righty. While we were on our missions trip to Israel, we got to go to the very valley where this battle took place between the Philistines and the Israelites. I have a map on my phone that our tour guide gave to us that shows us where the camp of Israel camped out and the camp of the Philistines camped out, and in between those two hills was the valley of Elah. And in the valley of Elah is where David fought Goliath. And so we went there and we kind of walked through the valley a little bit, our tour group did, and then Pastor Ray asked me to preach a message. And this is the message that I preached. Obviously, it was well, not obviously, but it was much shorter. It was an 18-minute sermon. Don't get excited tonight. I'm not going to preach an 18-minute sermon tonight. Brother Carlos, I see you getting excited back there, wanting it to be 18 minutes. But anyway, I'm going to preach a full-length sermon tonight. I got lots of extra references we'll be looking at. But I preached this message, and then, or this outline, I should say. And then after preaching the outline, Pastor Ray said, okay, everybody, go gather yourselves some rocks from the valley of Elah. My wife got, how many, 6 rocks for each one of the students? Did you already give those out? Awesome. All the students in our school got one. I was praying for God to let me find the perfect smooth stone, and I looked down and I saw one, and wouldn't you know it, it was the very stone that David used to kill Goliath. And I saw the indentation in one of the ends of the stone from his forehead, and there was just a little bit of blood from Goliath's head right there on top of it. So I have that in my office. It's worth $10 million, but I'm going to keep it there. And if we ever have a building campaign, maybe I'll put it on eBay for it. But anyway, the fact of the matter is we were there. We were there in the valley where the battle took place. Now, it's a big valley. It's not like a small little football field size valley. It's quite large. So there's no real way, because this battle happened about 2,800 years ago or so, but there's no real way to figure out what spot in that valley that it actually took place, but we just simply know that's the valley that David slew Goliath. And so when I preached this message to the folks in our tour group, the Lord spoke to my heart and said, preach it when you get home. So I want to give you some thoughts, and we're going to look at some other verses as well in just a minute. But if you look down at 1 Samuel chapter number 17, it talks about, in verse number 4, the size of Goliath. It says, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. All right, in the Bible times, a cubit varied between each person slightly. A cubit was from the tip or the end of someone's elbow to the middle finger, the tip of the middle finger on their hand. So from here to here would be considered the length of a cubit. I believe the average length of a cubit was approximately 1.5 feet. So it says here that he was 6 cubits high, and that would be about 9 feet. And then a span, I don't remember the exact dimension of a span, but it's meant to be below a foot. And so maybe 6 inches or so. I think the span of a hand was from there to there, and so that could be considered a span. But nonetheless, it was less than a foot. So somewhere between approximately 9 and 10 feet is how tall Goliath was. And so he came out, and obviously he was taller than any soldier in the Israeli army. There's one person that was head and shoulders above all the other average men in Israel. Y'all know who that was? King Saul. That's right. So if there was anybody that should have fought Goliath, it should have been King Saul, but he did not. You see, he was afraid. It says in verse number 11, when Saul and all Israel heard those words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now, while the battle was raging, David was told by his father. He said, I want you to let the sheep go. He was a teenager now. He's a teenager, about 17 or so years of age. And his father said, we'll take care of the sheep, but I want you to carry some food to your brothers. All of his elder brothers were at war. And he said, carry some food to your elder brothers. And what he carried was basically cheese and crackers, some parched bread there, and then some slices of cheese, and was taking that to his brothers. Now, mind you, this is after Samuel came to Jesse's house and anointed David with oil to be the next king in Israel. This is after that took place. So all of Jesse's family, all of his other sons, everybody in his household knew that Samuel had anointed David. Now, they were told to keep it quiet because if Saul found out about it, which later on he did, but when Saul would find out about it, most likely Saul would try to kill David, which of course is what Saul tried to do a little bit later. But for the time being, it was basically kept a secret, but his brothers knew. So David comes to the battle, and he's delivering this bread, or crackers if you please, and then some cheese for his brothers to eat. And Jesse said, bring me word and tell me how the battle goes. So let's pick up, if you would please, at verse number 22, and we're going to read down to verse number 51. All right? Well, I tell you, go to verse number 20. It says, and David rose up early in the morning and left the sheep with the keeper and took and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the trench as the host was going forth to the fight and shouted for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array, army against army. And David left his carriage in the hand of the keeper of the carriage and ran into the army and came and saluted his brethren. I mean, I could just see the excitement of David. Man, he's saluting his brethren. He's all excited that he gets to deliver this food to his brothers. And here's the thing. I'm sure David, being the younger brother of all these other brothers, he really looked up to his brothers, and I'm sure he admired them and he loved them, and he was excited to be able to bring them this food. And then look down at verse number 22. In verse number 23. And as he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words, and David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were sore afraid. And the men of Israel said, have ye seen this man that is come up? Surely to defy Israel is he come up. And it shall be that the man who killeth him, the king, will enrich him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. And David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, what shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him after this manner, saying, so shall it be done to the man that killeth him. And Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spake unto the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, why camest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride and the naughtiness of thine heart, for thou art come down that thou mightest see the battle. And David said, what have I now done? Is there not a cause? I read this passage, I'm thinking about Eliab, his eldest brother. I'm like, you idiot, what in the world are you doing? Ripping David's face off. He's going to be king. And what do you think's going to happen when he becomes king, in the future? But at any rate, he probably had some envy in his heart, thinking he should have been the one that was anointed to be the next king. But let's continue. Look at verse 30. And he turned from him toward another and spake after the same manner. And the people answered him again after the former manner. And when the words were heard, which David spake, they rehearsed them before Saul, and he sent for him. So here's what happened. Saul was in his place, wherever the kings were at the battle, but word got back to Saul, hey, there's this guy out there in the army that's asking about fighting Goliath. I mean, this guy's really interested in showing Goliath up, and you need to know about it, Saul, So he said, well, bring him to me. Now, let's look at verse 32. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with the Philistine. Now, Saul looked at David and saw that David was about 5'4", 5'5", but let's continue. And Saul said to David, thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth. He's about 17 or so. He's a teenager. And he a man of war from his youth. And David said unto Saul, thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him and smote him and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and smote him and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear. And this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. David said, moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of the Philistine. And Saul said unto David, go, and the Lord be with thee. And Saul armed David with his armor, and he put an helmet of brass upon his head. Also he armed him with a coat of mail. And David girded his sword upon his armor, and he essayed to go, for he had not proved it. And David said unto Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. And David put them off him. You see, Saul came to David and said, hey, you're going to the battle. Why don't you put my armor on? He was wanting to get some of the credit. He was saying, David defeated Goliath with my armor. He was doing it not for David's sake. He was doing it for vanity, for his own sake. But let's continue. Verse number 40. And he took his staff. And you say, how do you know? It's obvious. It's obvious. Saul was head and shoulders above the rest. David was shorter. He couldn't fit in that armor. It was too big for him. And Saul wasn't trying to take care of David. He just wanted a little piece of the pie. That's what he wanted, is what Saul did. But let's continue. And verse number 40, and he took his staff in his hand and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook and put them in a shepherd's bag, which he had, even in a scrip. And his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. And the Philistine came on and drew near unto David, and the man that bare the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, and ruddy, and of a fair countenance. And the Philistine said unto David, Am I a dog that thou comest to me with staves? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air and to the beasts of the field. Then David said to the Philistine, Thou comest to me with a sword and with a spear and with a shield, but I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee and take thine head from thee, and I will give thy carcass to the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air and to the wild beasts of the field, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. And it came to pass, when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag and took thence a stone and slang it and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine and slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine, and took his sword and drew it out and of the sheath thereof, and slew him and cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. Man, what an amazing, amazing story. Most of us that have been in church since a child, you've heard in Sunday school, you've heard in junior church. Maybe if you've been at this church for many, many years, you've probably heard me preach from the story of David and Goliath. But what I would like to do is I'd like to bring to your attention 7 thoughts that are not normal, usual thoughts when we think about the story of David and Goliath. Look down, if you would please, at verse 11. I'll give you the first thought. It says, When Saul and all Israel heard those words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Look down at verse number 24. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were sore afraid. Write this down if you're taking notes. Number 1, most people are afraid to face the giants in life. Most people, I'm talking about the average person in America, most people are afraid to face the giants in life. And that's exactly what happened with Saul. That's exactly what happened with the armies of Israel. And this 9 to 10 feet tall soldier, the average Jew in those days, I think, were about 5'6", 5'7" or so. I believe that King Saul might have been 6'2" or 6'4", and that's about the height of King Saul. But he was, he might have been 6'6", but he was head and shoulders above all the rest. And the rest of the men, they were probably about 5'6" or so, maybe up to 5'7" or 8. And then here's Goliath, 9 to 10 feet tall, and yet they looked at him and were afraid. They weren't going to do anything. He defied the armies of the Israelites, and they basically just went, "Oh, you're going to do something? I ain't doing nothing. You're going to do something? I ain't doing nothing." And they fled, and King Saul fled, and they went back to their camp where they were hiding out, just like the Philistines across the valley were hiding out. Listen to this carefully. Fear will cripple you and cause you to be bound. We're talking about life now. God never intended us to live in fear. It says in 2 Timothy 1:7, it's a familiar verse. You don't need to turn to it. But 2 Timothy 1:7, the Bible says, God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. So here's what God says. I've not given you the spirit of fear. And so the Israelites, King Saul, they were afraid, and that's why they couldn't fight Goliath. Fear will always cripple you. It will always cause you to be bound. One of the things that I hated most about COVID-19 and everything that happened since 2020 was the mainstream media and our government wanted to put us in a state of fear. We had to be afraid. Oh, what if we catch COVID? What if this happens? What if that happens? We have to shut down all the plants and make everyone stay at home. You know, what was it? For 14 days to flatten the curve. That 14-day stay-at-home order basically turned out to a year and a half of restrictions. And you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't go here. No large crowds, no gatherings in restaurants. If you go to a restaurant, it has to be outdoors. You got to have a canopy, all this stuff. And they made the students in the public school not go to school. They had to learn virtually from home on Zoom and things like that. And it changed everything. And even to this day, January 2023, we're still feeling the effects of those shutdowns. I took my F-150, had to get a transmission replaced, and I took it to the dealership. I think it was October 20th or October 12th, and it took all the way until the first week of January for the parts to come in. The parts. It's because they haven't been able to keep up with the supply and demand since that, however long it was, shutdown. And it's happened over all industries. I mean, all industries. In the car business, it's taking a long time to even get new cars made because there's a chip in all the new cars, a chip, electronic chip that's needed for all the new cars to operate. And during COVID, they shut down the plant that produces those chips. And then I forget for how many months they shut it down. But nonetheless, when they decided to reopen it, and it was safe to go back because of COVID, that now they're behind a lot. I mean, like a lot. And why did all of this happen? It all happened because the government and the media put us in a state of fear. Even to this day. Even to this day. My wife and I and Miss Catherine and my son Jack, we went out to eat at Panera Bread today. And there's workers there that have a mask on. Now, they didn't act sick. And it was just a normal mask. It wasn't any kind of a doctor's mask or any kind of a special mask. It was just one of those generic masks that you go to maybe Walmart or someplace and buy. But here's this lady. She was helping us out, and she's just sitting there with this mask on, And I'm like, why do you have a mask on? I mean, I didn't say that to her. I was just thinking it, But I'm like, good grief, what in the world? And there are people that I meet on a regular basis that live in fear. I mean, they've got their masks on. They probably are going to keep their masks on in public for the rest of their lives. And why is that? Why weren't they? I mean, all these diseases, all these viruses, all these bugs have always been around, for all the time that we've been alive. And people before COVID-19, they didn't wear masks, but now all of a sudden we have to, wear masks. It's all because of fear. But wait a second. Let's not talk about society. Let's talk about Christians now. People don't live for God like they should because they're afraid. They live in fear. As I was in the missions trip, fear of what? I'm fear of someone not liking them. Fear of someone, maybe, if you knock on the door, someone might cuss at you if they don't want to talk to you. Fear of rejection. How about this one? Fear of doing something hard. We have become such a soft Christian society in our country. We often, as a people now, we choose the path of least resistance. We choose to live for God if we do based on how easy it is. We'll go to the church that's closest to our home. Weather is such a obstacle for Christians these days. Fear of rejection, fear of people not liking you. I remember one time that, I've had business owners off and on in this church, and we've got some business owners here now, but years and years, over 20 years ago, 24 years ago, I had this business owner that said to me, I'm not going to go soul winning. I said, why not? He goes, because I might knock on a door of one of my customers, and I might offend them if they don't want to, I'm like, dude, seriously, you care more about customers coming to your business than you do about lost souls going to heaven? I mean, seriously. And that was the reason. He went soul winning twice, and then he said, I'm not going to do it again. Because one of the times he went with me, we knocked on a door. It was one of his customers. Now, we didn't have a bad experience with his customer. His customer seemed very friendly and all of that, happy to see us. I didn't get to lead his customer to Christ. But the fact of the matter is, it's that fear. It's going to hurt my business. Why do people not tithe? For fear. How am I going to pay my bills? Why do people not go to church and be dedicated to the cause of Christ? A lot of times for fear of what their family will say. Sometimes people's families say, hey, why don't you come do something with us and not go to church? Okay, I'll go do something with you and not go to church. Why? Because of fear. What are they going to think? They're going to get mad at me, or I'm going to miss out, or blah, blah, whatever. I mean, all these reasons of being afraid not to live for God. We are crippling ourselves. We are not excelling in the Christian life. And most of the reason is because of fear. I was over there in Israel, and I'm just going to tell you something right now. We are so stinking spoiled in this country of ours. I mean, God has blessed our country, and it's a good thing, but there's a negative effect of all the blessing of God. We think we have it hard, or whatever. We went to school 2 miles uphill in the snow both ways. When we were all this stuff. But in Israel and in the Roman times, now not currently in Rome, but way back yonder when Christianity first started, there was the Crusades and the persecution. Before Constantine in 318 AD legalized Christianity, it was illegal to be a Christian for approximately close to 300 years, from the time of Christ to 313. And there was 500,000 Christians who were persecuted and killed, who were buried in the catacombs there in Rome, just a few miles or so away from the Vatican, where the Vatican is now. And we went and visited those catacombs. And Christians, they did not deny Christ in the face of certain death. They weren't going to, if they denied Christ, they would be allowed to live. 500,000 people just in the city of Rome alone during those times, those 300 or so years, they were killed for the cause of Christ. Now go to modern day Israel, and there's intense persecution against Christianity in Israel. My wife and I went to this city called Bethlehem, and that, of course, it's in the Bible. That's where Jesus was born. Bethlehem is also called the city of David. That's where David was born, where he was from, in Bethlehem. But we went to the place where we think approximately where Jesus was born, and we got to do some sightseeing in Bethlehem and do some souvenir shopping. But when we went to Bethlehem, we met the pastor of the only independent Baptist church in the entire city of Bethlehem. Now, we could not find an independent Baptist church in the entire city of Jerusalem. Think about that thought. We were not aware, we could not find a single independent Baptist church in the entire city of Jerusalem. Well over 1 million people that live there. I can't remember the exact amount. Do you remember the exact amount of the population, honey? It's well over 1 million people. In the town of Bethlehem, there are 200,000 people that live in the city of Bethlehem. This one, and by the way, 85% of the residents in the town of Bethlehem are Muslim. So here's this independent Baptist church trying to get everybody saved they can. In the city that David and also Jesus was born. And so here's what happened. He told us some stories about when the whole history of their church. His dad started the church, and now he's the pastor of the church. He's 34 years of age. But he said there was a 2-year period of time and he mentioned the years in the, I can't remember the exact time, maybe the 1990s or 80s or something like that, but when his dad was the pastor. But there would be Muslims that would come into the church service while the church was going on, and they had these Molly cocktail bombs. Is that how you call Molotov? Molotov? Spell it. Molotov. T-O-V. I always can never. Molotov bombs. They would come into the service while it was going on. They would light it on fire and throw it into the church, and then it would hit somewhere and start a fire. And this pastor, he said, all of our ushers are trained. They're not allowed to be armed. You know, they're not going to be shooting with guns. But they were all trained to have buckets full of water every single service. When that bomb would go off in the service, they would quickly run to it with their buckets and douse it and take the water and pour it out. And then once they got it all taken care of, they went and sat back down and they carried on with their church service. And they did that for 2 solid years, just about every single Sunday. A group of Muslims would come in and throw a Molotov bomb right in there and try to disrupt their services. This pastor, who's 34 years of age, 17 years ago, he was a teenager, and he got attacked by Muslims, a group of Muslims that wanted to beat him up, and they did. They just started they hit him in the back of the head with a bat or a stick, and then he fell to the ground, and they're kicking him and they're beating him. The whole time they're saying, deny Jesus, tell us that you don't believe in Jesus anymore. And he would never deny the Lord. He told us while we were there in his church, he said he prayed to God and said, God, if you get me through this night, I promise you I will live for you for the rest of my life. And he told us while we were sitting together in that service in his church, he told our group, he said he felt the sweet presence of God. He says, I can't really explain it except for that God came down and he covered me with his grace, and I felt a calmness inside of my heart and my soul while they were beating me up and doing just about all but kill me. Obviously, he didn't die because he's 34 years of age now. But he said, on more than one occasions, I've been attacked and beaten up from Muslims because I would not deny Christ. I was talking to this man in Jerusalem. I was out soul winning, and I met this instructor that of Taekwondo, I think it was, that came out of the YMCA. And I went up to him and I said, hey, I said, hello, how are you? And he said, fine. I said, you speak English? He said, yes. I said, oh, I shook his head. I said, thank you so much. I said, I'm an American and a tourist. I'm a pastor from the States. He goes, you're a pastor? I said, yes. He goes, I'm a Christian. Well, you know, when someone said they're a Christian in that part of the world, doesn't mean they're saved. But this was on the night that took me 4 hours and 6 minutes to find someone to win to Christ. So anyway, I'm talking to him, and he says he married this lady whose parents are Baptist, and they witnessed to him, and he told me about his conversion. And man, I was trying to poke holes in that conversion, trying to see if I can get him lost so I could pray with him about his salvation so I can go back to the hotel. And I just couldn't do it, man. I just couldn't do it, you know, because he was genuinely saved. But at any rate, he said to me at the very end, he goes, man, it's hard to share our faith in Israel, in Jerusalem. He said, we get persecuted if we share our faith openly. And he asked me, he said, what are you doing out here? And I said, well, I'm sharing my faith openly. I said, I'm talking to people and asking. And I told him, I said, I've been able to see someone saved every night. I've been doing this. And he's like, really? He said, you have? Because he told me how he witnesses. He gets these students that come to his class, and he's training them and teaching them, and he develops a relationship with them. And if they ever ask him a question out of class about life or about anything, he says, then we use that as an open door to try to bring in and present Christ. He said, for the most part, we try to live it, and we try to get close to them, and then when the opportunity comes, then we take advantage of it and try to share our faith. He goes, but if we're open about it, he says, we're going to get persecuted. Now, I didn't get persecuted because I'm a tourist. And one thing that the Israeli guide said to us, he said, Israelis love Americans. He said, you all are our friends. You're our allies, and we genuinely love America. He said, and we love you more when you come here and spend your money here. And so tourism is a huge part of the revenue in the country of Israel. So they don't want tourists to ever have any problems. They want them to have a great time. And so I didn't face any persecution whatsoever. But people who live there, they face persecution. Listen to me very carefully. What are you afraid of for living for God? What fear do you have in America? You see, my family will reject me. Try being a Muslim who becomes a Christian in Israel. I mean, talk about persecution from family. I mean, that's intense persecution. Just because you got a family member that gives you a hard time coming to Hopewell, don't you dare use that as an excuse not to live for God. And look, don't let your financials, all this, debt that we're in our society, all the credit cards and all the payments and all this, don't you let your debt keep you from doing what God wants you to do when it comes to tithes and missions and just whatever, giving. Listen, you don't be afraid. You step out on faith. You live like God. Don't you be afraid of soul winning. There's no country in the world easier to go soul winning in than America. Don't you let fear cripple you. Number one, most people are afraid to face the giants in life. Number two, look at verse 28. 1 Samuel chapter 17. In verse number 28, it says, And Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spake unto the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, Why camest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride and the naughtiness of thine heart, for thou art come down that thou mightest see the battle. And David said, What have I now done? Is there not a cause? Number two, write this down. Never let negative and critical people stop you from doing what God leads you to do. This is point number two if you're taking notes. Never let negative and critical people stop you from doing what God leads you to do. You listen to me carefully. There's always someone who's negative and critical, whom the devil will use to try to keep you from doing what God wants you to do. You just got to be decided in your heart. I'm not going to let negative people, critical people, stop me from doing what God wants me to do. I have faced it for 28 years. I have had church member after church member after church member over these years who have been critical of me, who've been negative towards me, negative towards my wife, negative towards my children. I've had it, I've faced it, and I've never let it stop me. I've had people that say to me, if you preach from the King James Bible, my family and I will never come to this church. And I just say, I'm sorry, you can leave. I'm never going to not preach from the King James Bible. This is the book that God wants me to preach from. I've had people that get mad at me about preaching standards and convictions, especially when it comes to the standards of clothing and music. Those are the two standards that people, man, they get mad at me about. I've had people get mad at me because of my stand against alcohol. I don't think any Christian should ever touch a drop of alcohol. I don't think you should ever drink beer or wine or hard liquor or anything that's considered fermented fruit of the vine. And I've had people leave our church over it. I had a person, a married couple, that left our church because I said during the Lord's Supper, didn't even preach a sermon on it, but I just simply said, at this church we use grape juice to represent the blood of Christ because alcohol is blasphemous to the blood of Christ. Fermentation doesn't properly, fermented juice doesn't properly represent his blood. And that's all I said. And they never came back. And I said, why aren't you coming back? And they said, because from the statement you made during the Lord's Supper, we can tell you don't want Christians to drink alcohol, and we like to drink from time to time. And never came back again, all because of that statement that I made while observing the Lord's Supper. Listen, I'm telling you something right now. There are negative and critical people in this world, and the devil will use them to try to tell you not to come to church, not to live for God, but don't let them. David did not let his elder brother, his negative critical speaking, prevent him from fighting Goliath. Hey, look over at Nehemiah chapter 4. Keep your finger in 1 Samuel 17. Let me show you another passage along a similar thought, if you please. Nehemiah chapter number 4. Y'all with me this evening? God is good. God is good. Nehemiah chapter number 4. And if you would please look down at verse number 1. Nehemiah chapter 4. Look down at verse number 1. It says this, But it came to pass when Sanballat heard that we builded the wall, he was wroth and took great indignation and mocked the Jews. And he spake before his brethren and the army of Samaria and said, What do these feeble Jews? Will they fortify themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they make an end in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of the rubbish which are burned? Now Tobiah the Ammonite was by him, and he said, even that which they build, if a fox go up, he shall even break down their stone wall. Hear, O our God, for we are despised, and turn their reproach upon their own head, and give them for a prey in the land of captivity. And cover not their iniquity, and let not their sin be blotted out from before thee, for they have provoked thee to anger before the builders. Now look at verse 6. So built we the wall, and all the wall was joined together unto the half thereof, for the people had a mind to work. Listen to me carefully. With Nehemiah and the workers that were rebuilding the wall, they had those negative people that came to them, tried to criticize them and discourage them from building the wall, and Nehemiah wouldn't listen. They said, we're not listening to you, and they had a mind to work. And they rejected the criticism and the reproach, and they got the wall done. Listen, if you're going to live for God, you got to do what the people in Nehemiah's day did. You've got to do what David did when his elder brother criticized him and said, what, the naughtiness of your heart? I know the pride of your heart. You're here just to go back to those few sheep, all of that. He did not let the negative critical comments from his elder brother stop him from doing what God wanted him to do. Number 3, look now down at verse number 33, 1 Samuel chapter number 17. In verse number 33, it says this, and Saul said to David, thou art not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. Number 3, write this down. Age has nothing to do with you making a difference in this world for God. Age has nothing to do with you making a difference in this world for God. Listen carefully. It's possible that Goliath was in his 30s, maybe early 30s or mid 30s. It's possible. Here's David, 17 years of age. Goliath might have been twice his age. And Saul looked at David and said, David, you can't fight this man. You're nothing but a youth. He's been a soldier for the Philistines ever since his youth. You know what David said? That's not a problem. I can do something for God. I can do this. I can take care of this. And he gave the examples of all that he was able to accomplish. Now, you listen to me right now. Don't be mistaken. You do not have to get older before you do something great for God. Now, I'm even talking about young Christians. You may be older in years of life, but young in the faith. Take your zeal and use it for God. Go out there and do something for him. Go soul winning, build a ministry, build a Sunday school class, build a bus route. Do something great for God. Get excited about the things of God. Listen, don't sit there and think, well, I've got to wait till I'm middle-aged. I got to wait till I retire before I can do anything for God. No, you can do something great for God right now if you're young or if you're young in the Lord. You know, often, listen carefully now, often in churches like ours all across America, the most excited Christians while the pastor's preaching are the new converts. And the older Christians who have been here for years hardly ever say amen. They sleep while I'm preaching. They're not excited. They're waiting, looking at their watches. I hate that. I hate that. When people, when's it going to end? When's it going to end? When's it going to end? It's going to end when God wants it to end. I didn't get in this service tonight to get out. I'm not trying to, well, I got things to do. Listen, that's one of the problems with our Christianity. We got things to do that's more important in our mind than what God's doing at God's house. We can't have that attitude and be successful. You know what most new Christians are? When they come to church, they're like, wow, never heard anybody preach like this before. Whoa, look, someone got baptized. Oh, this is awesome. I remember one time we had this new couple that came to our church, and they were from a different Baptist church, and we baptized like 5 or 6 people that Sunday, and then 2 or 3 people the next Sunday. And before they joined the church, they came to one of our longtime members. They went, hey, they said, does this happen every Sunday? And the old time, member here, yeah, just about. And he's like, well, the last church I was in, we had like 5 baptisms the whole year. We had like 8 baptisms in the last 3 Sundays. This is incredible. That new person to our church was all excited. And the old church member was like, yeah, I guess so. Isn't that sad? You see, the older you get for the Lord, you ought to get more excited about God, more devoted, more in love with Him, more happy to be in church. Good night, this is the best place around, my soul. But you see, a lot of young people, a lot of young converts, a lot of people that are brand new to church, they've got that zeal, they've got that excitement, they got that joy of the Lord. Listen to me, you can do something great for God. You can do something great. Age has nothing to do with you making a difference in this world for God. Number 4, look at verse 34. 1 Samuel chapter number 17. Y'all still glad to be here this evening? God is good. Look at verse 34. And David said unto Saul, thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. Number 4, write this down. Be fearless. Be fearless. Can I tell you how unafraid David was? A lion came and took one of his lambs in his mouth and was taking off to go eat that lamb. David chased him down, opened the mouth of the lion, and took that lamb out of his mouth. He was carrying the lamb back to the sheepfold, or back to where the sheep were, and the lion rose up against him. He put the sheep down, and he grabbed the lion by the beard and took his bare hand and killed the lion. I'm telling you, he was a teenager. He was a teenager when this happened. Then a bear came, did the same thing, and he slew that bear with his own hands. Now, you listen to me right now. I watch videos on social media and stuff, and I was watching a video not too long ago about this bear that was in somebody's yard, just a small bear, and this husband and wife were like getting it on camera, and then the bear looked up at him and started coming at, they ran, and they're like running into the house, and all of that. And but David didn't do that. You know why? Because he was fearless. He was fearless. You know what? You ought to be fearless if you want to live for God. Look over at Acts chapter 4. Go to Acts chapter number 4. Acts chapter number 4. Look down, if you would, please, at verse number 31. I love this verse. Acts chapter number 4. We need Christians. We need pastors. We need preachers who resemble this verse in America. We need Christians all over this country that do what this verse says. It's so sad that we don't have not nearly enough. Acts chapter 4, verse number 31, it says, and when they had prayed, the place was shaken where they were assembled together, and they were all filled with the Holy Ghost, and they spake the word of God with boldness. You know what that means? It doesn't mean they were cocky or arrogant. It meant they had confidence. And guess what gave them their confidence? They were filled with the Holy Ghost. Guess how they got filled with the Holy Ghost? They had a church-wide prayer meeting. They gathered together as a church family, and they prayed together. You listen to me. Church-wide prayer meetings are important. We're going to have a midnight prayer meeting the first Friday night in February. I wish you all would come and pray in the middle of the night for God to do something great in our church. I wish you'd come out on Saturday mornings at 9:30 for men's, ladies, and youth and Spanish prayer meeting. I wish people in our church understood the value of praying together corporately. You see, they were gathered together and they prayed. They were all filled with the Holy Ghost, and they spake the word of God with boldness. You know what David was? He was a bold teenager. He said, that lion's not going to take my lamb. That bear's not going to take my lamb. He came down to the armies of Israel, and he looked at Goliath, heard him defying the armies of Israel. He said, somebody needs to knock his block off. Who's going to take care of him? Nobody would do it. He said, I'll do it. He shouldn't be doing that. I'll take care of this. Almost twice my size, probably weighed 200 pounds or more than David. He said, I took care of the lion. I took care of the bear, and I'll take care of this uncircumcised Philistine. Why? Because he was fearless. I love to see Christians and preachers, are you listening, who are fearless. I'm not afraid of a single church member not liking what I have to say tonight. When I go soul winning, I'm not afraid of a single person giving me a hard time for knocking on their door. You know what I'm not afraid of? When church members tell me they're never coming back to our church again, I'm sad about that. I genuinely am. I don't want any church members to leave. I wish church members thought like the Bible says church members are supposed to think. And that is this: God puts you in a church, it's your church family that God wants you to be in, then you stick it out and you stay. That's what God says in his word. Be in the place where God placed you. Plant your feet. It says, they that are planted in the house of the Lord shall flourish in the courts of their God. I don't fear church members. I'm not saying I don't care what you think. I'm not afraid of any church member. I'm not afraid of any person out in public getting mad at me for trying to go soul winning. I wasn't afraid in Italy, in Rome, when I went soul winning in a 95% Catholic city. I wasn't afraid in Israel when I went soul winning, all the Muslims and Jews that far outnumber the Christians. There may be 5%, maybe 7% of all the people in Israel claim to be Christians, and they're not all saved. But I wasn't afraid. You know why? Because I want to do something for God. I can't read this story about David and Goliath and not learn from it and be fearless. That's what we need. We need Christians, we need preachers, we need churches, we need pastors all over this country of ours who are fearless, not afraid to stand up to politicians, not afraid to stand up to the school board of the public schools, not afraid to stand up and take a stand in our neighborhoods that we're Christians and we're not going to just let the devil come and ruin our neighborhoods. Listen to me very carefully. We need to be fearless like David was fearless. Number 5, look at verse 38, 1 Samuel chapter 17. Verse number 38 through verse 40. Now watch this now. And Saul armed David with his armor, and he put an helmet of brass upon his head. Also he armed him with a coat of mail, and David girded his sword upon his armor, and essayed to go, for he had not proved it. And David said unto Saul, I cannot go with these, for I've not proved them. And David put them off him. And he took his staff in his hand and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook and put them in the shepherd's bag, which he had, even in a script, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. Number 5, write this. I only got 7 points, so we're almost done. Number 5, rely on what has been proven to work. Rely on what has been proven to work. You know what David said about Saul's armor? It was the king's armor. You think Saul had some cheap armor? You think Saul's armor was anything less than the best armor that Israel had in all of its army? Saul had the best armor. But here's what David said. I've never used this before in battle. That's what it meant when he said, I've never proved this. I never proved it. He goes, I never slew a bear with this armor. He said, I never slew a lion with this armor. He said, I never did anything in battle with this armor. I cannot go to war against Goliath with armor that I've not proved. He said, I have used a staff to ward off animals from the sheep. I have used the sling and a stone to defeat some animals that came after a sheep. He's like, I've used those before. I proved them. Hold your finger there. Look over at Jeremiah chapter 6, a familiar verse. Jeremiah chapter 6, and look down at verse number 16. Jeremiah chapter 6. Look down at verse number 16, please. Jeremiah chapter 6 and verse number 16, the Bible says this, Thus saith the Lord, stand ye in the ways, and see, and ask for the old paths, where is the good way, and walk therein, and ye shall find rest for your souls. But they said, we will not walk therein. You listen to me. If we're going to do anything for the cause of Christ in 2023, we need to rely on what has been proven to work. What does that mean? Stay away from contemporary philosophies. Stay away from modern tactics. We live in a society today, all kinds of contemporary philosophies, all kinds of modern tactics. One of them is removing the name Baptist off the church sign. Well, we want everyone to feel welcome and invited, and the name Baptist, it kind of pushes people away. There's kind of a stigma with the name Baptist. I wouldn't be surprised if these preachers and Christians that take the name Baptist off of their sign, I wouldn't be surprised if they don't get a Bible that doesn't have the name John the Baptist in it. Some dude named John baptized Jesus. No, it wasn't a dude named John. It was John the Baptist. I don't want to go to a modern tactic. I want to do what's worked. I want to do what God has proven over time to make a difference in the lives of people all across this world. Listen very carefully. I don't need a modern version of the Bible. You give me the old King James Version. That's worked. Great revivals across this land and across England were used by preachers that had the King James Bible. Souls by the hundreds of thousands and millions over the years since 1611 have been won to Christ by the King James Version. Listen, we don't need something contemporary. We don't need something modern. Let's rely on what has been proven to work, and let's just do what works. Let's not reinvent the wheel. What does Jeremiah say? Seek the old paths. You know what we need? We need old-fashioned religion. We don't need modern, contemporary religion. We need old-fashioned. You know, all these people worried about clothing and what do I have to wear certain clothes to go to church? I mean, I'm so tired of people asking me that don't come to our church. You know, people. You know, what do we have to wear? I mean, I make fun of it and I just say, well, we only have one clothing rule. You got to have clothes on when you come. That's our clothing rule. You can't come to church without clothes on, you know. But what's wrong with dressing up for God? What's wrong with treating God's house with respect? What's wrong with treating the presence of the Lord with honor and dignity? What's wrong with that? The old-fashioned ways. By the way, there ain't nothing wrong with the old-fashioned hymns. Nothing wrong with them. Let's sing the hymns. Let's sing the songs of God that have been blessed for years and years and years. We don't need contemporary music. We don't need a Christian rock band. We don't need strobe lights in here. We don't need little smoke machines in here. Let's just stick with the old book. Let's stick with preaching, old-fashioned standards and values. Let's stick with the soul winning. Let's stick with what's worked if we're going to make a difference. David said, I have not proved it. I can't use them, but I can use what I know works. And that's what he did. Number 6, go back to 1 Samuel 17, verse number 48. 1 Samuel 17. Oh, I wish I had the ear of all the preachers in our country. These stinking preachers that want to go contemporary. They got a big hole in their head, big enough to drive 10 semi-trucks through, with Brother Bill as the drivers. 1 Samuel chapter 17, look down at verse number 48. I love this verse. It says in verse 48, and it came to pass when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. Number 6, these are lessons that you can learn from the story of David and Goliath. Number 6, face your giants head on. Listen to me. Face your giants head on. What's your giant? Is it cigarettes? I talked to someone today, got to lead this man to Christ. He said for years and years and years he struggled with cigarettes. But he was facing it. He was talking about how he's trying to give it up. Listen, don't you just, I've had church members over the years try to tell me, I just can't give up cigarettes. I'm sorry, what did you say? I mean, Jesus rose from the dead. He conquered your sin and conquered hell, conquered world, conquered death. And that power of the resurrection of Christ lives inside of your body. And you're telling me you can't give up cigarettes? You can't give up chewing tobacco. You can't give up tobacco of any form. You can't give up alcohol. You can't give up marijuana. Don't you tell me you can't give up this stuff. You can have victory. You can face your giant's head on and say, I'm not going to let my giant get the best of me. You face that thing head on. I don't care if it's internet pornography. I don't care if it's cussing. I don't care what finances. Good night in the morning. Why are we a slave to debt? Why as a country are we a slave to debt? Because we are afraid to face our giants head on, and some of our giants that we face or that we deal with is our financial mess that we're in. Now you listen to me, there's a way to get out of it. There's a way to face it. And David's had Goliath coming at him. He didn't wait for Goliath to get to him. He ran to Goliath and he faced him head on, and that's one of the reasons why he won, because he faced his giant head on. Don't look at these giants that are in your life and think, I can't do it, I can't do it. You can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth you. Number 7 and last. Look at verse 49. Verse 49, it says this, and David put his hand in his bag and took thence a stone and slang it and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine and slew him, but there was no sword in the hand of David. Number 7 and last, write this down if you're taking notes. Find a way to prevail, to win. Find a way to prevail, to win. Listen to me very carefully. You've heard me say this before. Too many parents are concerned about teaching their children to be good losers. Teach your children to win. But wait, if you're going to teach your children to win, maybe you should learn to win yourself. Win. Prevail. Stop trying. Do it. Just simply do what needs to be done. What did David do? It said there in verse number 50, it said, so David prevailed over the Philistine. He prevailed. He won. He found a way. He didn't try. He did it. Listen to me carefully. If you want to be a success, if you want to do something great in your Christian life, you don't try to do something great, you do something great. No excuses. You figure it out. You find a way to get the job done. Let's look at one last verse, and then I'll say a few things, and we'll be done. Ecclesiastes chapter 9, one of my favorite verses in all the Bible. Ecclesiastes chapter number 9. Bible college students can't even stomach what I'm preaching here right now. I'm talking about modern Bible college students. Well, I went to Bible college. My wife went to Bible college back in the 1980s. I graduated in 1991. She graduated in 1994. But back then, it was just like a different mentality. We lived by the mentality, no excuses. We lived, get the job done. We lived, you find a way to get the job done. We didn't try. We did it. When I went to Bible college, you know what I said? I am going to graduate from Bible college. I don't care what happens. I am not leaving this place until I graduate. My wife and I got married, and she said to me, she said, honey, nobody in my family has ever gone to college and graduate. Would it be okay if we stick around here for 2 more years so I can graduate? Because I'll be the first in my family to graduate from college. I said, yes, ma'am, I'd be happy to. We stuck around for 2 extra years. We got married in 1992. My wife was a full-time student. I worked a full-time job, and she graduated in 1994. And listen to me, there's something missing in our generation of Bible college graduates or students. And not all of them, but a lot of them. Good night. I've hired so many assistant pastors over the years, and so many of them have buckled at this particular idea that I'm presenting to you right now. Look at Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and verse number 10. It says, whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, try with thy might. It says, do it with thy might. For there's no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave whither thou goest. Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it. And how do you do it? With every ounce of strength that you've got, with your might. Listen to me very carefully. How was it that David slew Goliath? He didn't try. He found a way to prevail. He won. You know what we need in Christianity? We need people who are winners. The Bible says, I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. The Bible says we are more than conquerors through him that loved us. The Bible says, thanks be to God, which giveth us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. You know what we need to do? We need to figure out a way. We need to learn how to prevail, and we need to win. We need to win. You know what Jesus is? You ready for this? He's a winner. When he comes back, he's going to put down the Antichrist with the word of his mouth. He's coming with an army from heaven, and he is going to destroy and wipe out the army of the Antichrist. Nobody has ever prevailed against Jesus. Yes, when he was crucified, they thought they prevailed against him. Yes, the devil, when he had Jesus crucified, he thought, now I'm going to take over the universe. I'll be in place of the Son of God. He thought he had won. But when Jesus rose from the dead, he conquered death, he conquered hell, he conquered the devil, he conquered sin, and he conquered the world that put him on that cross. He's a winner. And you're his child. And you're supposed to be a winner too. You know what David did? He prevailed. I'll be switched if I've been pastoring this church for 28 years and, 4 months now? I'll be switched if I'll just say, well, I tried. I guess I couldn't build a church. Guess I couldn't do it. Got to quit now. Couldn't get it done. Couldn't figure out a way. I'm not talking about attendance numbers. I'm not talking about, results. God's the one that gives the increase, so it's up to him what he wants. But I'm going to, listen to me very carefully, I'm going to figure out a way to get an increase. I have no idea how much it's going to be. I think maybe in the next 20 years, we might be a church running 20,000. I don't know, but maybe not. Maybe we'll just be running 200 or 300 in the next 20 years. I don't know, but I'm going to tell you this right now. I'm going to find a way to get the job done. I'm going to find a way to prevail. I'm going to find a way to win. I was out soul winning with one of our church members today, and I loved it because he was asking me questions. He was like, so, tell me, how's this and how's that? And he was asking me, he says, so when you go soul winning, when do you stop? And I said, well, I never stop before I see someone saved. I guarantee you, there's going to be someone that prayed a prayer. Now, if they're not sincere, that's between them and God, but I was going to pray with someone today about their salvation. I guarantee you, tomorrow, I'm going to find a way to get the job done. I'm going to pray with someone about their salvation. I think I proved myself and my determination. On the last night in Israel, when it was about 6 o'clock or so at night, and I started going soul winning, and it was 4 hours and 6 minutes or more, whatever. It ended up being 4 hours and 6 minutes. I don't remember the exact time that I started, but here it is, 10:15 at night. Guess what time we had to wake up in the morning to leave for the airport? 12:30 in the morning. We had to leave our hotel room at 1:30 in the morning to get on a shuttle bus and go to the airport. I was going to stay out on the street until midnight before I would go back to that hotel room defeated. Now, thank God it didn't take till midnight. God allowed me to see someone saved at 10:15 at night. It took me 4 hours and 6 minutes of soul winning. Now, I want to tell you something right now. That's what we're missing in our Christianity today. We have this mentality, well, just give it your best. Just try. You know what the Bible says? The Bible says on the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, the very last verse, God, Jesus Christ, said to us, be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. That's the standard. That's the goal. Jesus never said, well, just try your best. Just do what you can. Give it your best effort. No, he said, be, do, accomplish, win, prevail. That's what we've got to do. We're missing it in our society. We think that for some reason, if we have that mentality of prevailing and winning, that it's against being gracious and loving and kind. No, have the fruit of the Spirit. Be gracious, loving, and kind. Have all the fruit of the Spirit. Are you listening? That the Holy Spirit says that we're supposed to have. But don't let it be an excuse for why you don't do what God wants you to do. Prevail. Here's David. Slew Goliath. The odds were against him. If anybody should have been out there, it should have been Saul. But here's David doing what needed to be done, finding a way to get the job done, and prevailing with God as his aid. Let's not be defeated Christians this year. Let's not be Christians that just try. Let's do. As a church, let's do. Hey, let's have a big day tomorrow. You know why we haven't had big days in the past? Because church members, by and large, let the pastor and the staff work on bringing visitors to church. No, we all ought to take honor in this church. We all ought to take personal responsibility. We all ought to say, this is the church that I'm a member of. This is my family of God, and I can do something too. Not just the pastor, not just the staff, but I can bring visitors to church. I can see people saved. I can do something for God. And when all of us have that attitude and we learn to prevail, man, God's going to give us a great year. in 2023. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for allowing us to be here this evening. Lord, I love you with all of my heart, and I'm so grateful for all that you do for us. And thank you, Lord, for being such a loving and kind God. What an amazing thought it is that you even allow us to be not only a part of your family, but you allow us to be a part of the work of God, the kingdom of God. Lord, please help us to take these valuable lessons, these 7 lessons from David versus Goliath. Let's apply them to our hearts and our lives. And Lord, please help us to do what David did. Let us face our giants. Let us not live in fear. Let us not worry about the critics and the negative people. Let us prove what has worked in the past and use the old paths, not something new and finagled and contemporary and modern, but let us just take the Word of God and say, what did God tell us to do in the Bible? Okay, let's just do it. Let's just do what the Bible says. And then let's find a way to get the job done. Heads are bowed, our eyes are closed. Maybe God spoke to your heart tonight. If he did during the invitation, would you please respond? If anybody here needs to be saved or baptized, let's make those decisions tonight, would you? Let's all stand together. Heads are bowed, our eyes are closed. The pianist will begin to play. If God spoke to your heart, you come.